Good afternoon, everyone. This is Matt Kinsman, Head of Content at Connectiv. Thanks again for joining us today for a deep dive into B2B content marketing, real buyer insights. For the first time, revenue from marketing services, and that includes content marketing, are growing faster than revenues from digital display advertising and B2B media. But really understanding how buyers consume content is the key to making content marketing scalable and sustainable. NetLine's recently released 2019 State of B2B Content Consumption and Demand Report examines more than 4 million content downloads and hundreds of data points generated by B2B buyers as they actively research content that's specific to their various technical and business challenges. Today, we're happy to have David Fortino, NetLine's Senior Vice President of Audience and Product, who's going to share takeaways from the report and analyze 4 priority areas for building a successful content marketing strategy, and that includes by the people, by the company, by the industry, and how to humanize with data. With that, I'd like to turn it over to David. David, please go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's been some time. I believe it's been about 6 months since our last session with Connectiv, so it's good to be back. Time certainly flies, but this time around, I'm looking forward to sharing some insights regarding the platform, most specifically the distillation of all of the data accumulated via the adoption of the platform that we last covered on the prior session. So what I'd like to do is set the stage, and I think Matt briefly spoke about this. So these are our talking points today. What we're really going to do is set the stage for trying to understand how all of this data has been captured, how deep insights into B2B buying behavior, content consumption, lead gen, and buyer engagement is occurring across the B2B web. At the core, we'll be also breaking down the findings of our 2019 B2B content consumption and demand report with a specific eye on trying to interpret the research on behalf of B2B publishers and media entities. I'm going to be really cognizant of everyone's time. We'll try to keep this going relatively quickly. And if there's any lingering thoughts and we've got time at the end, please feel free to chime in. If not, reach out via social or email. So let's get going. Before diving into the findings, for any of you who aren't familiar with NetLine, we're the owner and operator of the largest B2B content-centric lead gen and buyer engagement platform on the web. One by one, many Connectiv members over the past few years have actually come to rely on our platform to power their underlying lead gen marketing stack, as it relates to not only servicing their clients, but also their own audience monetization efforts as well. Some of that platform is at no cost, and those are things that we can talk outside of this scope. But let's dive in and jump in onwards. So when we talk about the scale of data being covered in this report, it's really about tapping into massive audiences and distilling that into actionable data sets. And so at the moment, there are over 15,000 B2B specific publishers, media companies, bloggers, and so on the platform, effectively powering their native lead gen stack and audience monetization efforts associated to their gated content offerings. The gated content offerings could be anything from ebooks and white papers and case studies to webinars, even some gated podcasts I've seen. Most importantly, those publishers are focused on understanding how that content resonates with their audiences and what ultimately converts well for their clients. Collectively, it's the aggregate of those activities that allow us to consolidate all of this data into a holistic view into the B2B content consumption behavior occurring across the web, but at scale. We'll jump right here. Every year we spend a few months scanning a year's worth of data, and we're literally talking millions upon millions of gated content downloads across the platform. The goal is to amass the largest consolidated view into the first-party B2B content consumption behavior occurring across the web. This data really reveals from this effort a one-of-a-kind view into how professionals are engaging with content specifically throughout their own journey, whether it's their own journey around discovery, the commonly and most sought after journey of the buyer's journey itself, or ultimately it's about knowledge and expanding their kind of footprint and knowledge base around a given topic. Our goal is relatively simple. It's to arm B2B content creators with the digestible and actionable strategic takeaways in the spirit of delivering as much of our kind of internal data as possible in a way that helps them deliver stronger programs to their internal constituents and also their clients. Obviously, if you're able to do that for yourself, representing those types of initiatives to your customers and driving repeated successes become that much easier. And as you can probably tell already, we're extremely proud of this. This has been a multi-year product that we've become known for, actually, and has been recognized as something that's kind of been an absence in the industry. So we'll dive into the first segment, and we'll kind of skip over enough of this lead up and context setting. So let's just start the exploration process. For B2B content creators looking to overcome lots of noise and competition, and understanding the audience is always really your top priority. But by delivering into what those are actually consuming, you can more concisely connect the objectives with the interests and concerns your end audiences have, and also the discrepancies between what your audience's interests might be versus your own clients, and perhaps even your own management teams. But we're first going to dig into a tough reality to kind of set the stage, which is rather obvious, but a lot of the data that you'll be seeing here compounds this and makes it extremely visible. Professionals are inundated by a ton of content. It's increasingly harder and harder to get them to come back to digest more content, which starts begging the question, what can you do about that? How can you drive deeper engagement with your audience? How can you drive them not only further on site, spend more time, deeper engagement with gated content, but how does that translate even to value to your own customers? So the chart here quickly illustrates the increase in days between content requests from 2017 to 2018 by job level across all organizations, so across nearly 5 million leads processed. This unfortunately reflects an ongoing trend over the years that professionals are taking simply longer and longer to come back during kind of peak research patterns and efforts. And you'll see this varies a bit from specific job level. The one commonality, though, is that virtually all of them are taking more time to do deep level research, especially as it relates to deep and long form produced content. What that ultimately says, though, is that means this content needs to have impact, needs to have relevance, needs to be useful, and readability is really up there as well. Some of these things might be par for the course, you would assume, but sadly, we see it every single day that there's many marketers, media companies, publishers failing to address some of these fundamental pain points. And so for B2B content creators looking to overcome a lot of that noise and competition, it's really all about understanding your audience. It's always going to be their top priority. By delving into kind of what your audience is actually consuming, I'm hopeful that you're going to be able to more concisely connect your objectives with your client's interests and also your audience's interests. As you can imagine, this chart depicts a pretty harsh reality, and that professionals are inundated with content. It's making it incredibly hard for them to break through the clutter and see value in the point of engaging. But it's not all doom and gloom. Which is great to see. The consumption gap is a phrase that we coined, I believe, around 3 years ago. The consumption gap is specifically the time between the moment the content has been requested by an end user. So we're specifically talking about gated content here. And the moment it's actually opened for consumption. So that could be a white paper and they register for it and they ultimately get around to start reading it. It could be that they've registered for an on-demand webinar and they, perhaps 2 days later got around to actually listening and viewing it. This is a data point that we've been tracking for years. What the consumption gap data provides is perspective on a few things: content resonance, user bandwidth, and the likelihood to be sales ready, which directly relates to urgency. In a year-to-year comparison, the time to consume requested content has gone down by these amounts for many job levels by your audiences. Curiously though, executive VPs, individual contributors, are the fastest to consume requested content, clocking in at just around the 24-hour mark. You would think a lot of these would occur sooner, but then I look at myself, and throughout the day, I register for countless webinars and ebooks, and being honest, Most of the webinars I never even get around to attending. So thanks of you who actually did get around to attending this one. But beyond that, I download a ton of ebooks, and I tend to only be able to read them, not when I'm in the office, not even when I'm at home usually. I have to almost put them off till I'm on vacation or something. So this reality, when you look at it from a very human perspective of it being a conflicted space for our audiences and what to do about it, is just here for us to deal with, and we've got to find better ways to carve through that. But if we continue to kind of close that time frame, content creators need to innovate based upon the content types and incorporate relatable themes, which we'll cover a bit further detail later on in this deck. The good news to take away here is that while many professionals aren't coming back to the table as quickly as possible for more content, they're much faster to consume that said content once they have requested it. The byproduct could have been the opposite, that they're consuming more content out of a desperation to kind of accelerate their knowledge base, but then they never get around to consume any of it. And so that would ultimately be a true tragedy there, because there'd be an underlying lack of knowledge being built around products and services and solutions in the space. So quality over quantity is really what defined content consumption in 2018. I believe up until this point, it seemed like everyone was running around at breakneck pace, constantly trying to publish as much content as possible, whether it's just blog posts or long-form gated content or webinar series, just trying to keep up with either their competitors or the expectations of their clients or users. We've certainly seen that kind of come back a bit, reeled in a little bit, but with the focus on better quality. And I think there's a number of benefits that are delivered there to everyone in the process, let alone ourselves in this ecosystem having hopefully a little bit more sanity as we're delivering this content. At the core, though, when it reigns supreme, we're really looking at the consumption data by job level. Your audience is becoming more discerning and savvier as time goes by, right? It's not just a maturity of marketers, but it's also every end professional on the web. And now we're dealing with an entire population of natively born web users who expect content only to be highly produced. And so if it doesn't have a rich experience, if it doesn't have phenomenal design aesthetic, amazing branding, perfectly positioned titles, that content's basically DOA on arrival. That's unfortunate, but that is the reality. More often than not, a really compelling and well thought out title tends to be enough to pull a lurking buyer over the fence and compels them to engage. Does that mean they're going to translate into pipeline for you or your client? I couldn't tell you, obviously, with just that data point alone, but we've done a number of tests for many, many clients over the years and publishers. The one reality is that people do judge a book by its cover, and as much effort that goes into cover design, especially within publications, so much less effort has been applied to cover design as it related to digital content outside of digital publications themselves. You know, when you're talking about an ebook or a white paper or a webinar, more often than not, those graphics, sometimes they're not even cover graphics, they're just logos. And that makes zero sense because you're not articulating a story. And generally people don't fall in love with companies, right? They're falling in love with a narrative that helps address their pain points. So don't underestimate the power of those cover graphics. And sadly, I think to me, in my eyes, it's 2019. We're still seeing assets being released as if they were designed in 1999. There are just so many far better ways of doing that, whether it's just outsourcing to some phenomenal talent using tools such as Fiverr, which are very cheap, or finding some free tools like Canva that allows a newbie to actually design incredible outputs within minutes. And so there's really zero excuse these days to not be at least at baseline expectations of your end users in 2019. So this slide, this is an interesting one. And I'm really relatively certain that many of you have clients, perhaps leadership, pushing you to target a specific job level. And that job level tends to be the C-suite and really ignoring a lot of others. What sticks out to me here, obviously individual contributor is the largest specific audience segment of active professionals consuming content. That said, 64% of the total audience starts at manager level and goes up. The one thing to really keep in mind here is it's important to reference known realities and kind of level set expectations either internally, upwards to management, or outwardly to your clients. The scope of the buying committee and organizational influencers continues to grow, both in your own organizations and outwards. I often just look around for real-world examples, and so the question to you here is just look around your own office. Simply take stock of a recent decision that was made, especially one that involved an outside vendor. How many people got involved? How many levels inside that organization were involved? And imagine that was probably a relatively basic decision. Now imagine if that was something strategic that escalated to the C-suite, the number of influencers that are involved, the number of hours put in on research and reading these long-form pieces of content to educate themselves on that decision. And the picture becomes extremely clear. You need to have deep penetration within the organization to effectively influence the C-suite. But let's expand upon that a little bit more in a true literal sense. So a recent publisher example I'm calling upon was they were running a client asset. It was an ebook, and it was titled, I'm not going to give the whole thing away, but it was titled The CFO's Guide to Topic X. Immediately, they were curious why lead volume was lower than expectations and why virtually only CFOs were requesting the content, even though the filters on the campaign were accepting managers and above. In this case, simply by the definition of the title and the structure of the title, they've effectively alienated the C-suite influencers right away, right? They've only gone towards the C-suite. But perhaps more importantly, and referencing data that I already shared earlier, the C-suite is taking nearly 40% more time to research this content in between each touch point with additional long-form content. That theoretically means that there's a chance by you having a title like that, not only are you hurting yourself and you're not speaking to the other influencers in that company, but you're also missing that point in time where that C-suite person is, in this case, a CFO, is actively in market trying to find content that specifically speaks to their pain point. You'd be much better off trying to reach into director, managers, and perhaps even individual contributors whose sole job it is to educate the C-suite about those pain points. And when the CFO is ready, then they will be actually in a position to digest, consume, and perhaps even proactively do some researching on their own. So you can take this further as well when you start thinking about when you're engaging with users, especially as it relates to long-form content. Do you ever think about where they are when they're doing this, what time of day it might be? And I'm not talking about this from the device perspective, nor, oh, poor malware just launched, sorry about that. Not the device perspective, but really about where these people physically are in their life. It's not so much just saying, yeah, I've got a responsive web page, or this can be viewed on an iPad and a mobile device and renders perfectly fine on a PC. That's not what I'm talking about. When we started looking at content consumption behavior across the B2B web and buyer engagement, Wednesdays clearly are the most popular day by orders of magnitude to consume long-form content, followed by Mondays for some reason. Mondays to me is definitely not a day to do that, but statistically it seems like it is for everybody else. Sundays are the worst. Now I could stop here and just speak about the hours of the day local time that make most sense for people to consume content, but as you can see, it's basically from 10 a.m. local through 2 p.m. local, which really wraps up at 3 p.m. But we took it a little bit further and asked ourselves the same questions, but relegated that just to mobile devices and said, if we are making the assumption that most people when they're at their office aren't really on their mobile device, it's with them, but they're not reading long-form content because of that content consumption gap I referenced earlier, we know that. We can discern the where by assuming that most of these people are outside of the office. It turns out 34% of all of those nearly 5 million leads were consumed on a mobile device outside of their office. Oddly, and this metric really goes into the diametrically opposed position of what I shared earlier on desktops, is that Sunday is the most popular day to consume content on a mobile device. And it starts to make a ton of sense, right? Again, we're talking about humans. They're not at their desk. They are prepping for next week, perhaps begrudgingly catching up on some reading. It's late at night, which you're seeing. Most popular time is Sunday, 8 p.m. To 11 p.m. local. Again, this might be out of fear. This might be out of the need to catch up. This might be out of the need to be feeling refreshed and trying to start the week off on a new foot. But the reality still remains that as you are publishing content and your clients are looking to reach certain types of people, these are all things that need to be considered constantly. It's less so about the editorial side in my mind, because I'm generally not speaking about that. But if you're talking about any type of rich, highly produced asset, especially anything that's gated, these are things that you need to be thinking about. And so we've taken a look at by the people side of things. So now we're going to break things down by the company. And so what we've done on the people side is really observed behavior by role. So this is going to be looking at another perspective, which is not only the company, but the size of the company by employee size. As you can expect, across millions of downloads in 2018, there was a positive correlation between company size and revenues. Makes a lot of sense, I think, at the core. Trends also confirm that there's no single leader for the most targeted or active company size in the mix. You can see it's pretty well spread out, but there are a significant mix of either large enterprise organizations, which is that 10,000 plus bucket, or SMBs, the 1 to 20, kind of bookending both sides of this spectrum of company sizes. Unsurprisingly, though, the employee size and revenue boast a positive correlation, showing that targeting expectations align with larger companies, which equates to more revenue. So putting this information to practical use, you can align your expectations with objectives for better targeting. What I mean by that is, in combination with knowledge of the breakdown by people in industry, you can start creating dots between the people, the industry, the company size, annualized revenues, and start to ask yourself if that matrix of those data points really reach your desired audience through their own eyes and lens. It's one thing, again, to reach them through yours. It's another thing to be reaching it through theirs. And what I mean by that is that many times you're put in a position where you have this task of trying to reach this end audience that clearly has no business wanting to talk or engage with you. And yet that's been a directive given to you for any number of reasons. If data is diametrically opposing that, you've got to embrace those data points and act accordingly. Content creators can leverage these findings and put this information to practical use by aligning their expectations for better, more realistic content creation, audience monetization, and ultimately lead gen strategies focused on hitting various audience touch points. This slide actually takes a look at things from a different matrix. And so if we were to matrix the company size by job level, we can see that many of your clients tend to live in a world seen only through rose-colored glasses, right? And if only that was always true and everything was perfect. For context, though, many of your customers tend to focus their content and filtering initiatives on what is perceived to generate the fastest sales cycle. Traditionally, this is what you're already going to believe, and what I've covered briefly is someone with tremendous buying authority, with a very impressive title, working at a large company, who they've somehow validated or guesstimated that they have an extremely large budget. Year after year, though, the data again confirms that reality doesn't quite align with those expectations. C-suite content engagement represents, again, only 14% of all B2B gated content consumption behavior. 14%, right? Yet we hear every day from you and from your clients through you that people are looking to target the C-suite and senior leadership within these organizations. Yet those people just don't have the time to consume content. And when they do, they don't generally get around to doing it often. we really need to reinforce back into the industry. The content creators need to remain focused and vigilant on gaining traction by infiltrating a larger buying committee within that larger organization. Certainly, targeting C-suite can be viable when combined with realistic expectations, not only internally, but also with your customers, and used in tandem with an encirclement strategy. Encirclement strategy is something that I've seen used quite effectively, and it tends to be one of the more innovative approaches I've seen. And whether you do this via ABM or whether you do this via traditional marketing mixed with content syndication and lead gen and even display, there's a number of ways of doing this. Even now, direct mails is back in fashion. So the core objective here is that a vendor can go in and have assets designed for each persona that they've identified, each key influencer that they've identified that could possibly touch the buyer's journey within that organization. Then craft an asset that specifically speaks to those personas in their own perspectives, their own voice, speaking to the benefits, the pros and the cons, and so on. By doing that, you're clearly articulating the core value prop to that specific user and nothing more. You're not trying to use one asset to accomplish everything. As you could expect, again, like distill this back to day-to-day tasks in your own office. The CEO could care less what or how a certain software tool works, really could care less. Nor the operational manager, the person who's going to be using that tool, they could really care less how the billing schedule might be for that software. A proper encirclement strategy with content specific to all of the influencers along the way can turn what would be somewhat of an insurmountable challenge into a virtual slam dunk for an account to win. So we pride ourselves on being an industry agnostic platform. And now that we've looked at things by the people and also by the company, I'd like to try to break things down by industry here. Our publisher partners, all 15,000 plus of them, span the interests of professionals covering 300 distinct industries, and there's thousands of sub-industries living below that globally. Literally from agriculture to telecom audiences, we're delivering gated content experiences at scale to buyers as they are actively researching business, technical, sometimes even career-related content. And it's via that scale that we're able to capture these insights on which industries are most active and which industries are accelerating the most. So much of this slide shouldn't come as a surprise to you. Perhaps some of the stuff in the middle might. And to me, education stands out, but I'm a bit of a novice in terms of true in-depth knowledge of the education vertical, but that clearly is impressive. So I'd like to remind everyone when you're thinking about embarking on a new vertically oriented, especially a gated content initiative, keep some things in mind. Are professionals in certain industries simply more or less inclined to conduct research related to their profession? Do they gravitate to gated content at all? Or is this industry somewhat archaic and somewhat offline and not predisposed to fill out forms and so on? There could be a million different things that influence that, but also take stock of those realities, right? Again, part of using data is to not dispel it if you just don't like what it is. Data is your ultimate advocate. Just use it as a weapon, and be more intelligent in doing so and executing your campaigns. Is your content specifically speaking to them in a voice and a tone that they'd respect? Again, this is something we had just touched on. If you're speaking to the CEO versus a plant manager versus a contractor in the field, those assets cannot be delivered in the same voice and tone. They cannot be. There's no way. The CEO might love a very buttoned up piece. The contractor in the field might like the exact opposite. It's okay to have that diversity and mix of voice, of tone. It's still your brand, and there's still ways of controlling that. And so I think some of the best campaigns we've seen are those where the media entity, the publisher, or the end client ultimately was playful with certain audiences that they needed to be with and buttoned up and serious with those that really don't care for the playful aspect of things. But it was deployed in a manner that was concretely only targeted to those specific audiences filtered so that no one else was delivered anyways. And then they had a follow-up nurture path that was specific to those as well. And so everybody's getting what they need in the process, but nothing that they don't. And so when you start thinking about more industry-specific entities by default, it's best to really take deeper dive look into not only just the industry and your industry filters, but also the matrix between industry filtering, job level filtering, and building personas and more concise targeting strategies around where those two things intersect. Ideally, you can even leverage content titles to speak to the target industry and or the sub-industry. Some of the best titles that we've seen resonate with really, really archaic industries or really perhaps, I don't know, enterprise level topics are things that just specifically call out the exact audience, the exact topic, and the exact pain point all in the title. And that's it. It's not about the brand. It's not about a client case study. It's not about a product name. It's very much about saying as a brand, I'm speaking to you about this problem and here's why. That type of content always performs well regardless of who's publishing it. And again, I think I referenced this earlier, but really gone are the days where you can use one asset that can effectively speak to every one of your respective stakeholders. They all have different needs. If you're trying to go that route, it's an uphill battle, especially on the user side. I think the benefit to any of you who are selling custom content creation or those who are operating content studios is that this is a great opportunity to upsell into multiple pieces of content, specifically speaking to each one of those personas, and then weaponizing each one of those against distinct targeted audience segments based upon your client's needs. So we're heading into the final stretches. Right now we've condensed about a 17-page report into, let me take a look, into about 34 minutes, so right on pace. With that, I'd like to leave you some key observations and takeaways that more often than not are going to be well outside the typical jurisdiction of a B2B media organization. So this slide looks like it covers a lot. It's relatively simple, and I'm going to break it down into a couple segments. I suppose the first two things to really hone in on are an equitable exchange and humanization. And so nowhere on this page are we seeing something about equitable exchanges other than the phrase in the first paragraph. But what I mean by that is that when you start going back and referencing those data points that I was sharing early on, that professionals virtually across the board are taking more time in between requesting content, there's a reason for that. And it's not just that they've been busy. They've also been insulted by the industry as a whole for years, by marketers as a whole for years, taking advantage of people in the sense that these are people who are voluntarily filling out a form, giving information, and lo and behold, they receive a one-page data sheet in return. That was not equitable. That was not setting expectations appropriately for the buyer or the prospect. And so part of this falls back on us, on our clients, on your clients, your own position in the market, and really trying to police that experience that's offered to buyers and audiences as they're engaging with this content. Is it satisfactory to deliver something like that? I don't believe it is, and I think we've paid the price holistically across the industry because of that. Humanization is the more fun one to me because it allows anyone who's creative to playfully inject some level of human appeal into how content's positioned, but also allows you to understand things a bit more clearly if you're looking through your own buyer's lens. And so humanization is often thrown around in very ambiguous and kind of lofty manner. But in my eyes, you simply need to kind of always remind yourself that every single piece of content created, it's designed to reach a person. And I know that sounds so stupid simple, but the reality is I can't tell you how many pieces of content I see that it's as if a marketer wrote it for themselves or perhaps their competitor to read. It had nothing to do about the end user trying to understand and really discern why this piece of content is going to help me and why you, as the vendor who wrote it, is a vendor that I'd want to align my company with and perhaps even my career with. So a person who shares these same distractions, ambitions, and frustrations as you and I This is something it's really, I would say, systematically flawed right now in the space, and that we have to find a way to really hone in on problem-oriented content that's specifically solving pain points that your audiences have. And if you're looking at the chart on the left middle, those are the most popular words from titles taken out of every piece of content that resonated with the C-suite over 2018. Not one of them is focused on making a purchase decision or a software solution. These are about big deals that are way outside the scope of one specific piece of software. This is about how to communicate throughout an enterprise, how to better manage my team, my staff, and the organization as a whole. How can I be a leader based upon what I'm doing, or perhaps I'm not a good one and I need to be better? How do I motivate myself to do that, and or motivate my staff to reach for these goals that seem perhaps out of reach? That, to me, in and of itself was eye-opening. That I would have expected a lot of that content to be very buyer-centric, very, I don't know, like Forrester report, all of those types of things that you would expect the market would want you to believe is true. In reality, it's the opposite. The C-suite, they might be paid extremely well, but they're struggling with the same things that every one of us struggles with, right? We're all lacking motivation some days. We all can be better communicators. We all can do a better job at managing our time and our bandwidth. And if any of you are responsible for managing employees, we all can be better leaders. And so if you start looking over on the right-hand side, the charcoal and teal quadrant up on the top right, you'll notice that the most popular themes across all content, not surprisingly, with your audiences, was that they generally kind of distill into one thing, is that they're overwhelmed and need help. And some of them even ripple out to outside of the office type of assistant. And so you're looking at ebooks and tips and tricks and guides and cheat sheets. Those all tend to be things that are, at least perceived, and when done well, perceived to be lighter reads, higher educational value, not so corporate focused, not so brand centric, not so software or product centric, and very much value oriented. The titles, when you look at title elements such as 25 tips and how to and reports and secrets and tips and tricks and a guide to, all of those really take the spirit of what Wiley had started ages ago, which is the Dummy's Guide to X. They're really trying to take complex topics and make them be approachable. They're showing empathy to these users, understanding that, yes, you've got a lot on your plate and perhaps a ton of responsibility, and there's 35 vendors that are all vying for your attention. But I'm going to break this down in a simple way and help you understand why this is not only the right path to choose, but at the very end of that, why we might be the best vendor for you. And then lastly, some of the top themes, when I talked about taking it even outside of the office, this is a really interesting idea, and I think some brands might be better disposed to act upon this, while others, I think it might be a challenge, but I'm sharing it regardless, is some of the top themes of content related to productivity and work-life balance and interviewing best practices and leadership and skills mastery. And I think this speaks to a lot of the reality is that just because someone's put in a management level role, all of a sudden they're thought of being available to be making all of these management level decisions, yet clearly based upon content consumption occurring across the platform, these people need help and they need some guidance. And it's not just courses and perhaps one-on-ones with managers, but it's actually from peers and perhaps media outlets as well, and publishers in the space taking a leadership role to cultivate some guidance to the community as well. I'm of the mindset that if any brand can associate some of that movement associated to either sewing in some empathy, showing humanization, distilling complex topics into simple, I believe you're going to be at the end of a winning conversation. My ask to everyone attending here is just to simply make a pledge to try to weave those themes and narratives into your future content with the hopes of making a lasting impression with your audiences. And perhaps that'll be a first impression with some of them as well. And so this entire time, I've been referencing this report. Again, it's the 2019 State of B2B Content Consumption and Demand. It's completely free for you guys. There's the link here. You'll be able to either type that in. I believe you'll even be able to get a copy of it outside of this as well. If you have any questions after engaging with the report, please feel free to touch base with us. We're always, even if you want to engage socially, we love interacting that way. We're very transparent. We hope you enjoy the report as much as we did putting some effort into assembling it. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Matt for QA. I think we still have some time left, and we'll see if there's any questions to address.
We do. David, thanks very much. Folks, if you have questions for David, you have two ways to ask those questions. One, you can unmute your line by hitting *7 and just ask the question over the phone, or you can type your question into the Q&A box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Just type it in, send it to either the co-presenters or broadcast to all, and we can read that question out loud to the audience. David, while we're waiting for folks to submit their questions, I had a couple. I know early in your presentation you had talked about how a lot of publishers and a lot of brands aren't where they need to be just in terms of design and customer experience. And it really shouldn't be that way because there are a lot of free tools now that can help you do this rather easily. Can you go over that again? What were those tools that you mentioned, and what do they do? And are there any others that should be on our radar?
Sure. So to me, and there are a ton, but in terms of ones that I've been exposed to the most, I would say Fiverr is great if you're looking for a quick ability to reach out to an expert who's done something regarding design. It could be voiceovers. It literally covers a multitude of outputs. It could even be transcription services, all of that. Everything's $5. You can pay more if you want to layer services on top of that, but no joke, everything's super cheap. And the quality is good. And there's a review mechanism, much like you'd be buying off of Amazon or eBay. And so obviously, do your homework there, do some vetting, find someone who's been on the platform for a few years, has cultivated a very strong following. We work with a few of those folks, and yeah, it's worked out very well. A tool that I'm a huge fan of is Canva, short for Canvas, and that is free. We pay for the premium product, which is still very affordable. I think it's, I don't know, $20 a month or something like that. That allows you to do some amazing design level output for any type of imagery that you can think of, whether it's cover graphic design, social media graphics, and so on, without being a designer. I mean, I've had to do them, and I'm not a designer. Luckily, we have designers on staff too, and also multiple people who are just very creative. That being said, if I'm in a pinch and I need to churn something out, I'm not pulling this together myself. I'll go there. It looks extremely elegant, has my logo in it, uses our fonts, uses our color palette, which is completely on brand, and it took me 3 minutes. The reason why I think a lot of companies, media organizations specifically, don't use these tools is that there's an organization in some, or perhaps a culture in some organizations whereby there's a bit of fear-mongering associated to these tools, that the quality could never be as good as a designer who's in-house. That I think I could debate that. And if it's up for debate when you're talking about, a $20 a month product versus whatever you're paying in-house on a salary, it quickly becomes obvious what you can do and what you can't do. And so, yeah, I hate saying those things, but I do realize that I think that's why some of these organizations are hesitant to use those tools, is that there's a culture in place to prevent the movement towards those tools.
All right, terrific. David, you had talked about engagement on Sundays, and I think this is something that we've seen where you get people who are showing a surprising tendency to actually open email, read things on Sundays. Can you give us a sense of whether or not there's actual engagement there? Is this more a case of people, they're opening up their email, they're getting ready for the week, as you had said, and they're really just cleaning out their email box, or is there real engagement going on there as well?
No, so for us, we actually rarely look at our email KPIs. there's a ton of KPIs associated to kind of all of a gated lead gen process, as you could imagine. But aside from delivery rate and all of those things, the rest of it tends to be aligned with content. And so what I was referring to on that slide was really about only engagement, and it was relating back to the consumption gap of when people are ultimately opening this content, not the email, but actually from the email deciding that, yeah, now's the time I'm going to go read this white paper, or now's the time I'm going to go listen to this webinar or watch it. That's what I was talking about there. So yeah, very, very much engagement centric, which could be why it's also late at night. Because perhaps it's a time where they're sitting in bed or on the couch and they're trying to just catch up a little bit, learn something before going in the following day, and they've already registered for it, so all the barriers are gone, and it's just a click to engage.
All right, terrific. David, this is great information that publishers can really use to improve their own content marketing strategies. Can you share any suggestions for how publishers can use data, either this data or their own audience data, engagement data in their sales cycle? I asked this because we did an event with the Association of National Advertisers yesterday, and there was a panelist from a B2B agency who was talking a little bit about what he wants to see from B2B publishers. And he said he doesn't care about the rate card, never wants to see the rate card. He wants to see creative ideas. He wants to tap into that editorial integrity, that editorial brand, and he wants to tap into that audience data. And he wants to know more about that data, what you know about your audience, and what we together can do with that audience. Do you have any suggestions? Do you see any common mistakes publishers are making with audience data?
I think there's two things. So the one would be to get over the fear that this data is somehow yours and needs to be private and only private. The transparency of the data, it doesn't have to be fully transparent, but the transparency of the data, the engagement metrics you have, the real true activity occurring across your site or your portfolio of properties is what allows you to be credible, right? If it's everything lives in a media kit or a data sheet, everyone can put in anything that they'd like there. We all know, every marketer knows that it's just, I don't know, it's just putting lipstick on it. There's nothing there that conveys any level of sincerity or credibility aside from just checking a box and saying, yes, this is what we have. So my first suggestion would be reach beyond that and turn your data into an asset. We're big believers of that. We just launched a whole new tool about that, which I don't think you even know about. It's called Audience Explorer. But the idea is to make our data front and center to who we are as a business and make that our DNA, not talk about data and the fact that we've got a massive database of 40 million records. That doesn't impress anyone, right? It's about how your user engagement and activity and your brand, the matrix of those two, makes you a credible source to deliver a message on behalf of a sponsor. Taking that further, when you start getting the messages, I still really believe that there's just too much of this one-to-many approach where it's one piece of content being created and they're running it to, I don't know, it could be a comprehensive campaign where it's a mixture of branding and also lead gen and perhaps even just a general sponsorship. But the end ask of the user is quite confusing because it's really trying to speak to everyone. Yet in reality, it doesn't do a good job at doing that at all because it's kind of been a vanilla approach versus the opposite, which would be a great suggestion for any brand. And if you don't have a content studio in-house and or creating custom highly produced content, seriously consider doing so. I believe most vendors who are members of Connectiv do, but if you don't, please do. Because this is a great upselling capability. Speaking to, and I don't know who was on the panel, but speaking to that person, a media entity and a publisher positioned in the right space with the right cred around their own content studio could easily address that by saying, yeah, we're going to pull together a series of pieces of content, some of which will be native web-based content. Some of it will be gated. So we're going to have a mixture of quick-hitting, high-touch pieces of content, and then also long-form, high-engagement pieces of content. But each one of those is going to be focused on a particular maybe sub-vertical or a sub-persona that you're looking to reach. And in aggregate, by using very much an encirclement strategy, which I referenced earlier, that would allow you to accomplish a lot, still with the brand that you want to associate with as that person on your panel, still tapping into the credibility, but using their data and the ability to target specific personas in their own audience base with content that's really laser focused towards their needs and nothing more.
Mm-hmm. All right, terrific. David, thank you very much. Excellent job today. Folks, this report is available for a free download. You can certainly take a look at the deck for how to do that. You can also follow up with David directly. He's given you some ways to contact him with his closing slide here, and I'm sure he would be welcoming of your questions if you want to reach out to him directly. We will be following up with an archive of this presentation, both video, audio, and the deck itself, and we'll be sending that out shortly. Thank you for joining us today. This ends the webinar.